I am excited to be here today at Missouri Star Quilt Company, where we are working on the Just Keep swimming kit. So this is a kit from Shannon Fabrics, and this is a fun one because it actually has 3 projects in it. So it has a small blanket, a playmat, and a whale. And today we're going to make the playmat. So inside the Just Keep swimming kit, we've got all of the materials that we need for these 3 projects. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open this up and pull out the products that we need. So we need 2 different fabrics for this. We need the panel that's in here and the backing fabric. So go ahead and pull this out, grab my pattern. So I need this fabric here, which is the Luxe Cuddle Galaxy. It's fun because it's kind of modeled fabrics here. And then I'm going to pull all of this stuff to the side and keep my panel. So the panel actually has 2 parts to it. It has the playmat as well as the whales that you can make a little stuffed animal, which we will also have a tutorial for. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut this off where it has the whales so that I can do that separately. And then I'll keep the other piece for this project. And now I've got my big playmat panel. Now when you pull this out of the kit, it's going to be a little bit wrinkly, and I'll tell you, you can take an iron to and iron the back of it with a medium heat iron and with a damp cloth, and it will help get rid of those wrinkles. You can also throw it in the wash and it will pull out the wrinkles, or you can just let it be. So either way, but it will come out a little bit of wrinkles just because it's been packaged. You can totally get rid of those. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spray base this first onto my batting. So I'm going to spray base this onto the batting and then I'll cut it out and I'll do the same thing with the backing. So I'm using the Missouri Star Quilters Best Blend today is what I'm using for the batting, and I'm going to lay this out, lay my panel on top of it and spray baste it down. And I'm going to go ahead and put my batting out first. So this is a 45 by 60 inch batting, which is great because my square needs to be 45 by 45. So I'll have a little bit of extra at one end that I can use for a different project. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to base this down and base the batting and the fabric together, and then we'll cut it out. And that makes it a little bit easier than cutting out the circles and trying to match them. Sort of just make it match and then we'll cut it out. So I've got the cuddle laid out nice and flat. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull it back. And I'm going to spray the back of it with the basting spray. I like to use the Odif 505 basting spray, mostly because it doesn't stink and it comes out really nicely. So once you spray this on here, if you washed it, will come out. So if you're going to wash your fabric to get rid of the wrinkles, make sure that you do that before you have basted it. Okay. We go ahead, give it a little spritz. And then I'm kind of do this thing called swimming. I push it up and across and get it to go flat. Okay. I could move my fabric toward me, give it a good pat, make sure it sticks down really nicely. And the basting spray does work really well with Cuddle. So when I'm doing this, I always do the further away part first, but then I need to actually rearrange things so that I can also do the rest of it further away. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to turn my whole piece around. This front part is already basted. So I'm going to put this up. I'm going to pull my fabric back to the point that it starts to stick a little bit. Okay. And then I'm going to spray base this section. I'm just going to work my way across. And again, I'm just going to push it up a little bit at a time. If there's a spot that gets a little wrinkle, I just pull it apart again, push it back together. And just keep working my way across. So again, I'm just going to keep moving it so that I can reach it. I don't want to make this any more difficult for myself than I have to. And again, just a little bit of spray will go a long way. If you do get this outside of the area that you're supposed to, if you overspray your mat or something, just go ahead and use warm water. Warm soapy water will take the basting spray right off. rid of that little wrinkle. Pull it back a little more. If it starts to get a little too heavy, you can always kind of accordion fold it on your table as well and keep it in position. So I got a little bit more sticky area. I'm going to push down. Go ahead and spray some more, being careful to avoid spraying on the front of the quilt or the fabric. Okay, get that to smooth out. Stick it down. I'm going to check this, see if I got all the way out to the edge. Just about. I think that'll be totally fine. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now. I can choose to either cut it out right now or I can stitch it together. And I'm actually going to stitch it together and then cut it out because I find that a little bit easier. So if I'm working with the 2 pieces large, so I'm going to stitch a straight stitch all the way around and then go ahead and cut it. All right, so I've got my machine set up with polyester thread and 90/14 stretch needle, my walking foot, and I have it on a straight stitch at a 3.0 millimeter stitch length. So it's a little bit longer than you would normally use if you were working with cotton, but we found that a bigger stitch length will work better for Cuddle. So one of the things I want to do is make sure that all of my fabric is up here on the table to keep the weight off of it. So when it's coming through my machine, it's a little bit easier. I'm going to lift that foot up a little bit more and go ahead and put this on. So I'm going to stitch just inside of the printed circle. We're going to use the outside of the printed circle as a cutting line, and we have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I have a little wiggle room, and I'm just going to stitch all the way around here. I made it all the way back around. I'm going to go ahead and cut my thread and take it out of the machine. So now once it's basted onto the batting, solid as one piece, I want to make sure that everything is on there nice and flat, that I don't have any puckers. Then I'll go ahead and trim it. So you can use scissors for this or a rotary cutter and just trim all the way around. So I'm using a 45 millimeter rotary cutter to cut this one out. It's a nice big circle. The big thing you want to make sure is that you're just cutting on your mat and that you've only got the one layer now that you have of batting and fabric, that nothing gets kind of folded up underneath. So just make sure that you're cutting carefully, and if you feel something funny, stop. Sometimes we can feel it cutting a couple of layers and we just keep going, but you don't want to do that. Just stop, reposition, and we'll just cut our way around this big circle. My stitching isn't going to be even, and that is a-okay. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my scraps. I'm going to save that batting for another project, and I'll give my big Cuddle circle here a shake, get rid of the extra Cuddle dust. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the backing onto the batting, just like I did with this, except not stitching it. Okay, so with this piece, I need a 45-inch square. So the easiest way for me to do this is to kind of fold a big triangle here. It's 45 inches long that's been cut, and it's 60 inches wide because Luxe Cuddle in general, is 60 inches. So I know that it's 60 inches across, and I should have to cut off about 15 inches. But I'm going to go ahead and measure just roughly, because I'm going to cut my circle out of it later. I'm going to go ahead and snip it there. And then I can cut right up that line with my scissors here. All right, so now I'll put my scraps again to the side for a later project. And then I've got my 45-inch square of Luxe Cuddle that I'm now going to baste onto another piece of batting. So I've got those two together, so I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to pull back a little bit, spray baste that down, twist the whole thing, and get spray baste it all. So go ahead and make sure that I am not spraying the front of the fabric, the right side of the fabric. I'm going to spray the wrong side here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to swim that up, pat it down. And again, I'll turn the whole thing around. And spray base from the other direction. The biggest thing is having enough space that you can kind of lay it out like this. So kitchen tables are generally pretty good if you have a nice big cutting table in your sewing space. It's very helpful. Sometimes it ends up being the floor, but being able to get it out flat is the most important part. Okay, so I'm pull it back to where it starts to stick. Go ahead and spray the back of it. And then roll it up just a little bit at a time. We have to spray down this last little bit. So I'm going to kind of spray between the fabric and the batting just to make sure I don't get it on my right side of my fabric. Get that patted down. Now it's moved a little bit, so it's not quite centered on here, and that's totally fine because we're cutting out a circle and there'll be plenty of space for it to be on there. So it does not have to be perfect. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut off the extra of my batting just so that doesn't get in the way. All right, so now I've got a big square of the Luxe Cuddle and the batting together, spray basted together. Now I want to cut out a circle that is the same size as my other circle. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna lay these out. Make sure I have plenty of space. Okay, I'm going to pin it in a few places, then I'm just going to cut around it so that I have two circles that are the same. All right, so we could cut this out with our scissors, or I'm going to cut it with my rotary cutter and just make sure that my mat is underneath the area that I'm cutting. I'll make it a little bit faster. I'm going to just cut the whole circle so that the two match. All right, so now if you have a vacuum, you can go ahead and vacuum up all those edges and get rid of the Cuddle dust. I don't, so I'm just going to give it a little shake. All right, so now I've got two circles, one with the panel and one with the Luxe Cuddle that are the same size. At this point, we get to decide how we want to put it together, because there's really two different ways of doing it. You can put it together with a piping, or you can put it together with a binding. And I'm going to show you a little bit of both. So if we're using the piping, we're going to need 1-inch piping. So you can find that at some upholstery stores and some craft stores. You'll want to have the 1-inch, some sort of a cording to go inside of it, and you'll need the Cuddle 3 navy that is included in your kit. We're going to go ahead and cut some 5-inch strips. You need 3 5-inch strips to get all the way around this. We're going to go ahead and cut one, and I'll show you how to make the piping. If you want to do the binding, hang on and I'll show you how to do that after I show how to do the piping. All right, so I'm going to take the Cuddle 3 navy and I'm going to use that to create my binding or my piping. For the piping, I'm going to cut a 5-inch strip. So I'd cut 3 5-inch strips for the piping. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fold it right sides together. So it's across the width of the fabric. So the selvages will go together to create a 30-inch wide strip. And I will go ahead and cut that. Just get it nice and neat. If you lay it right sides together, the Cuddle will kind of hold itself. You only want to do 2 layers at the very maximum. 1 layer is easier, so if you're new to working with Cuddle, you can do this 1 layer at a time, measure your 5 inches and cut it there. Just 1 layer. I'm going to do 2, and I'm just going to do part of it, and then I'll move everything and do the rest of it. So I've got my fabric laid out nice and flat. I'm going to use my ruler, measure it against the edge of my fabric. Make sure that it stays nice and even. Hold down tightly and run the rotary cutter right along that edge. Now I'm going to kind of fold this and carefully move it over. Because I don't want things to move too much. I just want to cut the edge of that, the rest of that strip there. So again, I'm going to match it so it's 5 inches, and it's going to connect with that line that I already cut all the way over to the selvage edge. Now to do the piping, you're going to cut 2 more of these so that you'll have 3 5-inch strips. I'll go ahead and give this a shake. Okay. All right, so now I've got my 5-inch strip of Cuddle, and I'm going to put my piping into it. So the cording is going to come in here and have to get wrapped around. So we're just going to pull this over. Now this part will take a little bit of time. You're going to want to carefully pin it so that it stays fairly tight in there. So I found that if I pin it kind of at an angle, that seems to work best, and pinning it often. You want to make sure that you're not stretching it as you go, that you're just kind of folding it straight over that piping. Okay, so I'm just making sure that the raw edges match. Fold it over and pin it. So once we've got those strips cut, we're going to need to sew them together into one long strip to create the piping for that. So we're going to go ahead and sew them together. You want to put your strips so that the nap is going in the same direction. So I'll lay them end to end and make sure that my nap is going the same way, just by giving a little pet. Okay, that nap is going to run parallel to the selvages. So then I want to put them together just like I would for a quilt binding. I'm going to put them so they're at a 90-degree angle, and I'm going to sew from corner to create a new one. So one of the things about sewing with Cuddle is I want to sew from here to here, and if I try to sew this, it's going to move and do all sorts of fun things. So I'm going to pin it basically parallel to where I want to sew it, and I'm going to put a few pins in here so that I don't have to take any pins out as I'm sewing. So I'm going to pin on either side of it so that I can sew from here to here. And these pins will all stay in and keep the fabric exactly where I want it to be. If you want to go ahead and mark this, you can from corner to corner. I'm going to go ahead and eyeball it and see if it works. So I'm going to put my needle down right at the corner of that. I'm going to aim for the other corner over here. I've got my stitch at a 3.0. And I'm just going to do a straight stitch all the way across. Go ahead and do a little back stitch there. And take my fabric out. So I've sewn it the whole way across. I'm going to go ahead and take those pins out. I will trim off this edge. So my big seam allowance is here. Just going to cut it. I'm going to cut it at about a ½ inch. Doesn't really matter too much. You just don't want to cut it too small. So I cut it there, make sure all my pins are out, and now I'll have a long enough binding to go all the way around. So once you've got your binding all together so that you have one long piece. So then we're just going to lay it so that it's wrong side up. And I'm going to put my cording in here. I'm going to lay it out so it's kind of in the middle. So this is a 1-inch cording and a 5-inch strip. I'm going to let it hang out the end just a little bit so I can keep track of it. I'm going to fold it over right sides together and pin it so that my edges match. And I'm going to go ahead and pin it at like a 45-degree angle here to kind of use the pins to keep the cording where I want it to be and to hold those edges together. I'm going to pin every few inches to keep it where I need it and keep those edges together. All right, I'm just kind of going to push that cording down so that it stays closer to the edge. Put the pin in. And I'll just keep working my way down the piping. So once you have pinned the entire thing, you're going to go ahead and sew it. I'm just going to sew this one part to show you. We're going to take it over to the machine. You're going to sew it with your walking foot and just the edge of that as your seam allowance. So basically a 1/2-inch seam allowance. We're going to work it under there. Put the foot down and make sure that as I come along here that my foot is running right along the edge of the fabric. So I want it so that the foot is going to be here. So it's going to be a little under, maybe a 1/2 inch, but that's what I'm kind of shooting for, is a 1/2 inch. So don't let it get smaller than that. All right, I'm just going to run it right along the edge of that. And as I go, I'm just going to kind of keep checking my raw edges, make sure they're still matching. Reposition as I needed, and using my stiletto to keep things where I want them to be. The stiletto is really good for things like this because it will hold through both layers better than my fingers will just holding it across the top. So I really like using this tool for more precise kind of piecing. All right, so you'd sew it the whole way around, just like this, to create your piping. We're gonna go ahead and take it out to show you just a little demonstration of this. So once your piping is completed, it'll look like this. So that your cording is inside and you've got a little seam allowance here. It's gonna be a little loose in here, and that's part of how it just has to work with the walking foot. But we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna take our top piece here. You're going to lay your piping out, pin it here, and then you're going to go ahead and measure about 8 inches down. So we can actually measure on our ruler right here. So here's 8 inches, and this is where I want to start sewing. All right, and I'm just going to pin this all the way around. You could use clips if you'd like. Fabric clips would work just as well. And you'll just pin this all the way around the border of your playmat. Stitch this in position. You'll sew this onto the top. You'll sew your piping all the way around and join the ends. Then you'll finish by putting the backing over it, sandwiching it, and pinning these together and sewing. Then you turn it inside out, similar to how you would do a throw or that sort of thing. It ends up being that the piping is on the outside. For a lot of machines, this is a little too much fabric and thickness to do, so we have a different way that you can do it, and you can actually just bind the edges. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so let me unpin this because we're gonna start with our strips of Cuddle 3 Navy. We're going to use that for the binding. So that we're going to cut into 1 3/4 inch strips. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut that. Again, we're going to fold this right sides together because the Cuddle can be folded 2 layers, but no more than that. If you're new to sewing with Cuddle, I would suggest that you measure out your 1 3/4 inch strips, draw them on the back, and then cut along those lines. If you are comfortable using it, you can double it up. Make sure that it is folded widthwise so the selvages are together. So it's going to meet selvage to selvage. And then we're gonna go ahead and get that nice and flat. And then we can cut our strips. All right, so if we want to go ahead and mark this, so if you're new to working with it and you haven't worked with Cuddle very much before, it's really helpful to mark it first. And then we can get some really nice straight lines on there. I like to use a silver Sharpie is the easiest thing for me. You can also use Taylor's chalk, and there's a variety of other things that people use for marking on it. If it's a lighter fabric, like a medium fabric, sometimes I'll just use a black Sharpie. As long as you are cutting it off, it's all right, but make sure that you're actually cutting off any of the ink that shows up. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to mark this. First, I wanna get a straight line. So I'm gonna get this to come off my selvages, be nice and straight. And I'm just gonna draw right along this line. And I'll move this across and get that line to continue the entire way. And again, I'm gonna make sure that the fabric fold is lining up with the edge of my ruler. And go ahead and mark it. So the next row, I'm going to move this down to 1 3/4 inches. I like to mark it a little bit of a heavy 1 3/4 inches. So I kind of put that 1 3/4 mark on the inside. I'm going to go ahead and mark that. And again, I'll move this over and continue that line. This really helps when the fabric wants to shift on you, that you can see that it has shifted. Sometimes it's a little harder to see underneath the ruler if it has moved. So drawing these lines first actually is very helpful in keeping some consistency and some accurate lines across here. And I'm just going to draw these out so you can see what I'm going to cut, and then I'll cut along those with the rotary cutter. So for this, again, I'm going to need 3 strips to go all the way around. This one, like I said, is 1 3/4 inches for the binding. So now I can go ahead and cut these. And generally when I'm cutting my binding strips, I'll cut all 3 rows, or however many rows I've got. I'll cut them all at the same time and then scoot the fabric. And that tends to be more helpful to get the lines to be accurate than moving it each row. So if it moves just a little, I can kind of tap things back into place, line it up on my line that I drew, and cut it out. And this one I'm actually going to cut the other direction because 1, it's wanted to move, but 2, it's such a tiny strip that I can't really lay my ruler on there and get it to stay. So if I lay it the other direction, it'll help. All right. Then I can go ahead and scoot all of this over and cut the last bits of those strips. They do have some rulers that are 36 inches long, and they work very well for this because it's 30 inches across. But the 24-inch ruler, you'll just need to move it a little bit as you go. Okay. So again, we're going to put these ends together just like we did the other. Let me get all these clipped. All right, put this away. Go ahead and give my strips a good shake. All right, so now I'm going to put the strips together into one long strip, one long binding strip. So again, I'm going to find the ends, figure out which way the nap goes by petting it parallel to the nap. The nap on this one is heading down, so I'm going to make sure this one does. These do as well, so I'm going to go ahead and combine those ends. And I'm going to pin it so that they are at a 90-degree angle, which you can do on your board. You can check it, make sure that it's right. You can eyeball it. And again, we're going to sew from one inner corner to the outer corner. So this one I will want to back stitch just a little, just a couple of stitches. Work my way across. Back stitch again. Make sure that worked. And then trim that off, and we'll do it again. So we've got the 3 strips all together. So here's my next, the nap goes down. I'll make sure that the nap goes down on this one. So it's going to be the other end. And again, I'll lay them out that same way. So they're at 90 degrees from each other. Put a little pin on either side of where I want to sew so that I can leave that pin in there. And sew that corner as well. Now I will trim that. And we'll have the binding strip, which will be 3 binding strips together, so it'll be a little bit longer than we need to go all the way around, but it'll get all the way around without any issues. And that's really what we want, is to have plenty. So at this point, we're gonna sew the 2 pieces together. So when we were doing the piping, we sewed them one, and then we kind of sandwiched it. This one, we're gonna do the opposite. We're gonna actually put them batting to batting and put right sides on the outside. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna lay the Luxe Cuddle out first. And get it as flat as I can. And then I'm gonna lay my panel on top of it. Now, because we have batting on there, it doesn't matter which way the nap is going. You can check it to see if you can tell which way the nap is going, but it really doesn't matter on this project. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna pin a few places to make sure that it matches. And stays matched. So basically I'm going to do kind of the quarters, and then I'll go in between there, get them to match all the way around. This is another place that if you wanted to, you could use kind of mix up pins and clips in this. I kind of prefer my pins. And again, we're going to pin perpendicular to the edge because we're sewing on a curve. So straight lines, we generally parallel. Curved, we'll do perpendicular. I'm just going to put pins in every few inches, making sure that I'm catching the backing, both battings, and the top panel. All right, so again, we're pinned probably every 3 to 5 inches all the way around. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put it through the sewing machine and zigzag the whole thing together. So instead of just binding it now, I want to actually adhere all 4 layers so that when I put the binding on, I work with it as one layer. So I'm going to make sure I've got plenty of room here because I want to keep this all up on the table as I sew it around. I want to keep the weight off of my lap and on the table. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this to a zigzag. We're going to do 4 and 4. So 4 wide, 4 long, and I'm just going to zigzag right along that edge to secure the layers, all 4 layers of the batting and the Luxe Cuddle backing and the panel together. So I'll just zigzag all the way around. Okay, as I get back around to the front, I see that I have a little part that I missed, so I've repinned it. I'm going to make sure and go over that. Give it another glance over, make sure I've caught everything. I'm just going to go in just a little. Make sure I get that edge caught. All right. All right, so now I kind of just go over it, make sure I've caught all of my edges here and that they've stayed fairly even. Because I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I do have a little bit more wiggle room than I would with traditional quilt binding. Go ahead and get rid of my extra threads. And now I've got my piece all put together. So at this point, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and quilt it. You can kind of quilt around each of these pieces. You could quilt it differently. If it's going to be washed very much, you'll want to quilt it so that the batting doesn't fall apart in the wash. And that's an easy enough way to do it. You could also do some large crosshatch, whatever way you wanted to quilt it. But you could absolutely do that at this point. Then we're going to bind it. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to do basically traditional Cuddle binding. We're going to sew it to the back, bring it around to the front, and raw edge top stitch it down. So it's a very easy way of doing binding, and this is the way that you can bind all sorts of things, including a circular playmat or a quilt. So I'm just going to find a place to start. It doesn't really matter. I usually don't choose the top. I usually choose a side or the bottom. So it'll be kind of hidden. And I'm going to go ahead and start pinning it on. I'm going to pin every once in a while, and then I'm going to get my clips and bring my clips in. Looks like my binding could use another good shake. So I'll make sure and shake it again before I get over to the machine. So I'm just going to kind of work my way around here. And then I'll clip in between so I don't have quite so many pins to deal with. So I've got my jumbo clips is what I've got. These they are from Clover Jumbo Wonder Clips, and I really like them because they hold down a large section of fabric. So they'll hold down the whole area that I need. So basically the way that I pin this is that I will do like a pin and a clip and a pin and a clip, so that I have to take out half as many pins, but I'm holding down as much area. For me, I've had less luck using them for the whole way around. I feel like they tend to move on me a little bit. So I like to use the pins to give it some extra stability. But I do like those clips for their ease of being able to take them off as I'm sewing. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep all of this on the table. So with the weight of the fabric, it's important that you're not trying to fight it with gravity, because it will want to take it places that you don't want it to go. All right. So again, I'm going to clip, and then I'll pin in, or I'll pin and then clip in between. And I'm going to do that the whole way around. So as I come to a seam here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim my threads. I should have done that earlier. We're going to trim those, and then we're going to get this to stay open. So it's not super important that it stays open, but it will be a little easier to sew over. If we get that to stay open, and I'll just keep on pinning and clipping. So if we were doing this with a cotton binding, we would need to have cut it on the bias so it would have a little bit of stretch. But because we've done this with Cuddle, and it has stretch along the widthwise of the fabric, it'll just go right around these curves very nicely. You do want to make sure that you don't actually stretch it as you go. And it has a tendency to curl if you stretch. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that, but instead using its natural tendency to kind of bend its way around. So again, I've got another spot where my seams are joining. I'm going to go ahead and pin so that I can. I ran out. Oh no. Pack 2, here we come. Oh no, wait, I've got more. Wait. All right, got a few more. Fabulous. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to clip in between, clip right on top of this seam just to get it to stay open for me. And then as these come around, I need to have a tail just like I would for a regular binding. And I want to have enough that I can overlap. So I'm actually going to stop sewing here, and I'm going to start sewing over here so that I've got a nice overlap. All right, I'm going to put a couple of pins because that's my MO for where I want to start and stop. So I'm going to do that here, and then I'm going to do that over here just a little bit, and I'm going to pin over here to give myself a starting and ending point, and that will be enough that I can combine these ends when I get around there. But I'm going to start and stop here, go all the way around, sew this on. All right, and before I start sewing, I'm going to go ahead and clip this long tail off because I know I won't need that. So I'm going to take this over, and I will sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, using my walking foot kind of as a guide. I'm gonna slide this under there. I'm gonna lift my foot up just a little bit extra so I can get it underneath, since it is a little thick right now with all these layers. Can use that. So as I'm sewing, I want to make sure that my fabric is sticking out to the right just a little bit so that I can see it, make sure that it's catching right. I'm gonna go ahead and switch this back to a, there it is, 3. So a straight stitch, and I'm going to put it at a 3.5 stitch length because I'm going through a lot more. So I want it to move a little bit faster, and I think it's going to need to have a larger stitch length to actually move through very well. So we're going to give that a try. It's one of those techniques that you can use to get your fabric to move a little faster, is to up your stitch length. I'm going to back stitch just a little to get it secure. I'm going to work my way around. And again, I'm just going to make sure that the fabric is coming on the right side of my walking foot, and I can see it, and I'm going to use my stiletto to try to keep it from building up at all. If you have the ability to lighten your presser foot pressure, this is when you can do that. If it's starting to build up at all as you sew around here, you can use the stiletto to keep it nice and flat. Reducing the presser foot pressure or just slowing down will all make it a lot easier to get it to go on nice and flat. Go ahead and get that seam nice and flat. Hold it in position with my stiletto. We'll come back around to where the pins are. Now back stitch, and we'll pull it out. All right. So now we've gotten it stitched all the way around. See, it's nice big stitches all the way. I've sewn it with the gray thread, even on the blue. You won't ever be able to tell, and it's going to come back around to the front. And that's how we're going to stitch it down. But first, I've got to finish up these tails. So I have to make this go all the way around in a circle. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to make these tails match. We're going to do this kind of the same way we do, the way that I do at least for my cotton quilt bindings. I'm going to pin this in position, and I'm going to pin this over the top so that I can make sure that they are actually going to fit the area that we have to cover. So I'm kind of pinning down closer to the end here. And then I'm going to use my scrap bits that I had before. So I'm basically measuring 1 3/4 inch overlap in the middle is what I'm aiming for. So my top one here comes further, so I'm going to mark on this side of it. Okay, I'm going to get that out of the way. Kind of just hold that in position. And then what I want to do is mark on this side of that strip. Okay, so as they overlap, they will overlap the size of the strip that I just made. You can measure it with your ruler if that's easier for you. I like to use the little strip. It's a little bit easier for me. And now we're going to go ahead and cut on those lines. And I like to cut them just a little bit shy. Mostly so it'll kind of stretch a little. It's better than having it too long. I'd rather stretch it just a little bit to get it to fit. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to lay them just like we did before, at right angles to each other. One of the things that I found with this, if I do it this way, is that I can't really see the point that I'm getting to. So where I need to sew across from one corner to the other corner, I can't really see where that corner is. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to stick a little pin in here, and then I know where to aim. You could also mark that with your marker and just stitch across that line. Okay, so I've got the 3 pins in. This is where I'm aiming for, it's right here. I'm going to start here and sew all the way across. Put this underneath here. So this is kind of the hardest part of sewing the binding on, really, is trying to get it with all of this other stuff here. So make sure you just kind of pile it up close to you. Get it to be super flat when you are putting it underneath the foot. I'm going to go ahead and carefully put the foot down. And then I'm going to stitch forward just a little. And then backward a couple stitches too, just to secure it, and then we'll stitch all the way across. I'm kind of aiming for this. With the tape, I can actually see where my 1/4 inch is, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of hold it in place with my pin, because that's what I've got right here. I'm going to aim for that corner, do a little back stitch, and take my piece out. Okay, so now before I trim anything, I'm going to check it and make sure that it actually worked, that I didn't twist anything. Looks like it fits just fine. So I'm going to go ahead, clip my threads, and clip my seam allowances, and pin it in position again. So I can pin that down the rest of the way. And for this part, I like to use pins more than the clips, because the pins will hold it very tightly to where I need it to be, and the clips will tend to move just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that. Again, I'm going to slide it underneath the foot using that extra little lift to get it under there. I'm going to start just before where I ended before, so that'll kind of overlap a little bit. Make sure my needle's going to go down on my previous stitches. Do a little back stitch, go forward, and get the rest of this binding in position. My stiletto again, hold that in place. So as I come up here, I'll hold it down so it'll go underneath the foot. Go ahead and take my last pin out, and then use my stiletto to hold it, make sure that it's going to fit right where I need it to. And again, I'm going to aim for the stitches that I started with. And make it go on a continuous line. Back stitch just a little, and clip my thread. Okay, so now I've got the whole thing sewn all the way around, and now we're just going to top stitch it in position. So when doing this with the Cuddle binding, the great thing about the Cuddle binding is this just comes right around and is just going to be a raw edge. Cuddle is a knit fabric, so it won't fray. So all of this it just has to be stitched down. It doesn't have to be secured by rolling under or anything else. It will actually just stay like this forever and be beautiful. Okay, so I need to switch out my thread. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clip this down. If I were doing this as a gift for someone, I would probably change it to blue thread, the navy thread, to be able to hide those stitches even more. I'm going to keep it with the gray today so that you can kind of see what those stitches are and actually how well they will hide, oftentimes in Cuddle fabric. We're going to go ahead, clip it. I'm going to work my way around this. So when I do the binding around to the front, I generally just use the clips. And this seems to work well enough because I'm just going to use the stiletto and make it go where I want it to go. And it's in place really securely with the stitching. So that seems to work okay. If you're more comfortable with the pins, you're welcome to. Some people prefer the smaller jumbo or the smaller Wonder clips, but I prefer the jumbo. So you can see this kind of naturally just curves right around and wants to be right in place. Okay, now that I've got it clipped all the way around, I'm just going to take it back to the machine. I'm going to reset it to a zigzag stitch and go all the way around this. we have a serpentine stitch. I might try that. I really love a serpentine stitch. This machine has it, so we're actually going to try it a little bit, see if we can get a serpentine stitch. Otherwise, you can do a zigzag stitch, and I do a wide zigzag at 4 millimeters wide, 4 millimeters long. But I like to try to play around. So let's see. So a serpentine is going to be stitch 36. There we go. All right, and I'm going to give it a try just on some of my scrap binding here to see how it stitches out and if I like that stitch on it. So I'm going to make it a little bit longer. So generally I do a 1.8 and a 4.6 is what I use on my machine. This one is at a 5, so we're going to see what that turns out like if I stitch it this way. Let's see how that goes. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to change these settings a bunch so you can see what it looks like. So if we go back down to 1 and it's going to change to both. Okay, so I'm going to do it at 1. That's interesting. I'm so excited. I love learning new things. Okay, we're going to do it 1 and a 3. We'll see what the difference is. Okay. So this was with the 1 millimeter and 3, makes it just a tighter. This was the 1.8 and 5, so it makes a big longer S curve. This is really what we want to go for, is this big long S curve. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to reset that to 1.8 and 5. All right, and then we're going to use that to stitch all the way around this. And what that does is it gives it a really nice, it's just a really nice finish to it. The thing I like too about the serpentine, you'll see, is that you can actually kind of hide your mistakes in that, which is really one of my favorite things about Cuddle. So you don't have to be perfect with it. We'll be able to hide some of the mistakes of the imperfection of our stitching. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to take this out, get my needle to come down just left of my stitching line from before. So my goal is to get my S curve to land mostly on my blue fabric. So we want it mostly on the binding. So let's see if we can get it to start landing where I want it to. Sometimes it takes a little bit of moving things around to get it to be where you want. So take your time getting it started. Then you can come back around and tidy it up at the end. Okay, so as it gets to the left edge, that's where I want to stop. So that's where I'll keep my eye and make sure that it's getting to the left edge of that. We're just going to stitch a little S all the way around. Again, if you want to hide your stitches, make sure that you pick a thread that will hide in the fabric so it would coordinate with the fabric. With this one, you'll be surprised at how much it will actually hide in there anyway and just kind of give an embossing look. But matching the thread will be even better. And again, I'm going to make sure that all of my weight is over on the table, and then I'll use my stiletto to hold my fabric right along that stitching line from before so that it will match top and bottom, or as close to it as I can. So I've got a seam that I'm going to go over, so I'm just going to make sure that I'm holding that seam down nice and tight. Sometimes this is where it'll want to give you a little bit of extra, a little extra fabric where it'll push a little. So you just got to control it just a little bit more by using the stiletto, keeping the fabric where you want it to be. I have to say I'm really happy with how it's coming. All right, we're on the home stretch. Just around to the very end. We're just gonna make these match up as well as we can. This is when I'll always kind of do a little double check to see if I need to fix anything. Sometimes the beginning will get a little bit wonky. This one worked out all right. So I'm just gonna make sure I hold that over and do the last of the stitches. And then I always want to go over just a little bit of what I stitched at the very beginning and do a little lock stitch. So I'm going to go over just kind of a half a serpentine here so that they've crossed paths. And I'll do a little back stitch, which will do a lock, and then I will take this out. and I'll clip all my threads. Okay, I'll give it another good shake. And there we go. Look at that. All right, so the serpentine goes all the way around. One of the things that I really love about the serpentine stitch is that it does not have to be perfect for it to look really nice. So there can be some wobbliness in the serpentine that you can see upon close inspection. I can notice it, but it's a little harder to see than if it's a zigzag. So then you can see on the back, it kind of completely hides in there, right along the edge. So any of this that you want to go ahead, and then if it gets stuck in here in the seam, you can use your stiletto to pull it up, which will hide any of your stitches even more and gives you a really nice soft backing. So there you go. So all you're gonna do, you bind it. Now you're ready to go. If you decide, if you changed your mind, and you would like to do some quilting now, didn't do it earlier, you could totally do it at this point, and it is ready to go. Yay. I really love this. I really do. It's really cute. I love the binding on it. All right, so that's it. That's the playmat from the Just Keep Swimming kit. There's one variation on it. I love this playmat. It's so cute. I hope you'll join us for the other tutorials we're doing for this kit with the whale and with the little wee one blanket. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hi everybody, it's Jenny from the Missouri Star Quilt Company. We hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you aren't already part of the Missouri Star Quilt Company family, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss a thing. And if you click that bell, it'll notify you every time a new tutorial comes out. See you next Friday.